My name is Sheridan. I'm an amateur naturalist here in North Wales. I like all things wildlife. In fact, we garden for wildlife, a quite large garden here, and enjoy observing, encouraging and recording the wildlife that's here. I'm going to talk about one aspect of that wildlife, bees. Thanks Amelia for inviting me to make this little talk and to divulge this star fact, which you may or may not know. In the UK, we have nearly 270 species of bee. Yes, nearly 270. When people talk about bees, they often think about the honeybee. And often in the press, magazines or whatever, they talk about pollinators, and the photograph is of a honeybee. And they often show the honeybee as the best pollinator of all. But in actual fact, we have what we call solitary bees. We have 242 of them. 242 species of the 270 solitary bees. I'll come to those later. 24 are bumblebees. I'll also talk a bit about those later as well. And only one is the honeybee. The honeybee that you're probably familiar with because it's talked about a lot, lives in a hive, a managed hive, generally speaking, with a guy in a suit with a smoke thing to calm them down, sometimes feeding them when they're short of food, really, for them to kind of forage on, short of flowers or whatever, and we take honey from them. And often they're the go-to bee if people want something to pollinate things, fruit, vegetables, flowers or whatever. But in actual fact, better pollinators are wild bees. The wild species of solitary bee and the wild species of bumblebee. They've been shown to be better and more efficient pollinators than the actual honeybee. Here's a bumblebee. This is a white-tailed one, possibly a buff-tailed one. Sometimes hard to tell the difference depending on whether it's a queen. You can recognise them because they're a bit different to honeybees and a bit big and fly slower, quite hairy, quite colourful. In the garden, say 24 species, but in the garden you probably have up to 7 maybe. It's the big 7 as they call them. Buff-tailed, white-tailed, red-tailed, garden, early, common carder and tree. I'm not going to go through what they all look like. You can probably find out quite easily by googling or looking at a book or whatever. The big 7, quite common in gardens where you've got lots of flowers and maybe you've got a bit of habitat where they can make a nest. They like to make a nest in old mouse holes, or maybe in a pile of leaves, or in a base of a grass tussock or something like that. Early in the year they'll be searching around for somewhere to make that nest, and once they've found a spot they'll provision that nest with some pollen and nectar to lay her eggs. The larvae will feed on that pollen and nectar to create the first worker bees, which will go out and bring back more pollen and nectar for more worker bees. And as it progresses, the nest gets bigger and bigger. Not massive by any means. We're talking tens of bees as opposed to thousands in the honeybee hive. So it's so round about this time of year, there will be quite a lot of bees around, of bumblebees around, worker bees, and they'll be thinking about creating next year's queens. So the males will appear to mate with the females to create next year's queens, who will then find a spot to overwinter for next year. Quite different to the honeybee situation, but always worth looking out for. Solitary bees. As I said before, male mates with the female has fertilised eggs then, so she's looking for somewhere to lay her eggs and some food to lay her eggs in so the larvae can feed and then develop and grow, pupate, and then become next year's generation. a lot of solitary bees, quite a lot of different lifestyles. Can't talk about them all. We talk about two groups, the mason bees and the mining bees maybe, which you may well have in your garden. Mason bees first. The red mason bee. This guy is the most common of these species. It likes to find in nature. It would probably use an old beetle larvae hole in a tree. These are quite short supply these days, so they're quite happy to go into drilled holes in wood or in cardboard tubes or that kind of thing. Okay, what it does, it kind of creates a cell within that hole, which with mud, which so it needs a supply of mud. There's a picture here showing the bee carrying some mud here to its cell. Once it's got it to the cell, it creates this is a special bee box, where you can see inside. So this is the kind of the tube, like the inside the tube, and you can see the grey cells with the yellow pollen inside, and in the pollen she'll lay her egg, and the egg will hatch and then eat the pollen. The larva will eat the pollen and develop into bigger and bigger, eventually pupate and become the bee itself. Okay, so that's the mason bee. There are other kind of bees that do something quite similar, but instead of using mud, they'll use leaves. Leaf cutter bees, here's a couple here. Leaf cutter bees carries a leaf into the same kind of hole. These are old leaves that they've cut sections out of, and she'll use the leaves to make a cell in which she'll put a pollen, nectar, egg, and then another cell, another cell, another cell. So different variety. A couple of bees there, quite common in gardens. Mining bees are slightly different in the sense that they don't go into a pre-existing hole. They'll dig down, as in per mining. They'll dig a hole. You can see here, the hole here, in the pile of soil here. They'll dig down and then create branches off. At the ends of the branches, she'll put a pollen and nectar, lay an egg, seal it off, then do another one, do another one, do another one, before she's laid all her eggs. She may well dig more than one tunnel down. The bees that do this are things like the tawny mining bee. There's one there, quite a nice brightly coloured tawny, reddish, furry body. Okay, and the ashy mining bee. There we go. Ashy mining bee, quite a great bee, quite recognisable, very common actually in gardens. So there you go, 242 species of solitary bee, very broad range, very different, small, large, different lifestyles, but all important to the health of the countryside and well, great pollinators. Encourage them. You probably need to leave things like a bit of bare soil so the mining bees can actually kind of dig down fairly easily. And if you put out things like drilled holes, you'll encourage them to actually kind of, the mason bees, to actually come along to your garden, and there you can enjoy them. Thank you very much.